call to order the meeting of the Zoning Bylaw Committee of November 8th, 2023. Alphabetical roll call of who's here.
Clark Brewer here.
Tom Callahan's here.
Jack Creighton here.
Cassie Malatesta here.
Oh, there's Cassie. Okay, and Mike is here. Mike Dickey is here.
Yes, Mike Dickey's here.
Okay, so I'll get right into it. The point of our meeting tonight is solely to hear from our consultants, UTIL, regarding their suggestions for the creation of a zoning district that will comply with the new housing choice legislation. For those of you who have not participated in CBC meetings, just as a refresher, and for those of you who may listen to this now or later, the state has passed legislation that is requiring each community with an MBTA station to create a zoning district within a half mile of those stations to allow for multifamily development as of right at a rate of 15 units per acre, which is far more dense than anything we allow at the moment under our own zoning. For Cohasset, that means the numbers are that we have to develop 43 acres into such a district, and that translates to the potential, I emphasize potential, of 638 units. So UTO has been provided to us by a state grant, which they are at least helping some of the towns out in dealing with this legislation. And we have met with them at different times over the course of the past summer. And I thought tonight their contract was ending, and that's why we were going to do this final public presentation, but we just found out that they will be able to continue with us as we go through the bylaw process. The target is to implement this bylaw at the Springtown meeting. It will, here's David from our group, good. Thus far, the marching orders of this committee has been to create an overlay district within the 3A commercial districts. Given the town's current zoning posture and its posture for many decades of not having multifamily development in our residential areas, the marching orders so far have been to keep this kind of zoning out of the residential districts. So they have presented us with some ideas on that, and that's what they're going to present to us tonight. We have to allow this as of right. We can encourage, but we can't mandate mixed use. But one of the reasons of doing it as an overlay is to perhaps have mixed use so that Cohasset doesn't lose any of its small but yet valuable commercial tax base. So that's the background of this. Or by the way, in Cohasset, we not only have our own train station, but a portion of the town is within a half mile of the North Scituate station. So we do have the ability to create perhaps two districts rather than concentrating one place, and that has been the marching order thus far. But again, we'll see what UTL shows us. All the select board, other leaders in the town, this board will make decisions about where that district ultimately will lie. So with that background, I'll turn it over to UTL, whichever one of you is going to take the lead, and you can share the screen at your leisure, and off we go.
Thank you, Tom.
Oh, and as far as, yeah, let me just say that in terms of the formatted thing, I'm going to let them go through their thing and then take questions from the 5 of us that are here from the bylaw committee. We do have Kevin Hine, who's another member of our planning board here, and so he will be able to ask questions as well. And if there's anybody in the public who joins us, I don't see anybody out there now, but we'll open it up to some public questions. But anyway, thank you, and go right ahead.
Thank you, Tom. I just by introduction, I don't think I've met I've met some of you maybe, but just for the record, I'm Matthew Littell, I'm a principal at UTL. I work on both architecture and planning projects. We have been working with a number of communities, Lincoln, Arlington, Norwood, Milton. We're at a good place, I think. You know, this law is evolving and the way it's interpreted is evolving, but I think we've accumulated enough knowledge to be helpful. I want to quickly introduce Taskina Tareen, who's managing the project from our office, and Xiaorang Zhang, who's also working on this project. Tom, I thought I would just give a quick overview of where we've been, where we've come from, and then outline what we think the next steps might be for further iterations as a point of refinement. I have a quick summary in the show of what the law requires. Maybe you're all familiar with it, but it might be useful for me to just quickly go through that, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. All right.
Okay. As Tom mentioned, the MBTA Communities Act essentially requires a multifamily district near the rail access generally. And one important point is that multifamily means buildings with 3 or more units. A finer point is that it can also mean 2 buildings with at least 2 units in each of them on a single lot. So that's a subtlety that doesn't come up very often, but in general, it's promoting this fairly low level of multifamily. Another important point is that the zoning has to be written in such a way that development can proceed without the need for a special permit. Site review is obviously permitted, but it shouldn't be set up to sort of unreasonably block a project. In Cohasset, the state has determined, as Tom mentioned, that the district size needs to be a minimum of 43 acres, and this can be split into different chunks, but at least one of those chunks needs to be at least 50% of the total area. So it needs to be in one, what we call a contiguous area. At least 20% of the district needs to be within half a mile of the commuter rail station. And any other sort of chunks or sub-districts need to be at least 5 acres each. So those are some of the rules about the district size. And then in terms of density, obviously 15 units per acre average over all of those areas, for a total of 638 units is the number that was arrived at for Cohasset. And then not only the area, but the unit capacity as well. 20% of that unit capacity needs to be within a half a mile of the T. The criteria for compliance include meeting the contiguity standards, the minimum area, the density requirement. In the zoning, what is not permitted are age restrictions. So you can't require senior living facilities or other sorts of things. Reasonable setbacks, height limits, and then no restrictions on the number of bedrooms or the size of bedrooms or the number of occupants. So it's intended to ensure that there is a true multifamily district. Okay, we a while ago, we did a very quick draft to get a feel for what the size of the district would be and where it might be located. We put it all within the T, both to the north and the south of the rail corridor there. I think this was quickly determined to not be appropriate. It was using too much of existing single family residential area. So we moved on fairly quickly from there. our most recent concept included 2 areas. We were advised to explore both the commercial areas slightly to the south of the T up here in the north, and then to explore a little bit of a little area here, not technically within the half-mile radius of the North Scituate T station, but along a commercial corridor. So the Cohasset station area is straddles Route 3A. I believe there's paint store, hardware store. There's some soccer fields here. I believe there are still some undeveloped parcels over here that have been subdivided by a master developer. And then there are some parcels up here to the north. One important thing to understand is that the state's model takes excluded wetland areas into account in terms of the calculations. So here's a parcel, the closest one to the T station, that is showing, according to the model, that about 15% of that land is excluded. The wetlands do not hurt you in terms of your density and calculations. What it does is it removes those areas, and it only considers the density on the developable area. We often include parcels that have a lot of wetlands because we need them for contiguity purposes to connect to other portions. But in general, they do not hurt your compliance so long as you're reaching the required numbers. And the model that the state has provided us automatically factors this in and gives us their data for wetlands, and it includes, I think, a buffer zone as well. It may not be exactly what the buffer zone is, but they want us to all use the same database. It's approximate and probably sort of good enough. So wetlands in those excluded areas will certainly be a factor. In the south, it's a collection of, I don't know, 5 or 6 parcels right on the town line there. Again, you can see that it doesn't quite get into the half-mile radius of the T, but it's consistent with the idea of not developing or zoning into your single-family fabric, but keeping these districts in your commercial district. So the inputs that we have, and Tom, we can talk about refining these inputs, but we've set a maximum number of floors at 3. We've set the setbacks at in the Cohasset area at 10 feet to the front, 10 feet to the sides, and 20 to the rear. The 3A South sub-district by the town line, 15 in the front, 10 in the rear, and 10 on the sides and 20 in the rear. We've assigned a minimum parking spaces per unit of 1, and a maximum units per acre of 15. Just so you know how this works, there's a very complex spreadsheet that was created by the state. It's locked. You can't edit any of the inputs or the formulas. And basically you sort of input this. It's got access to the list of parcels, and it through various calculations, it comes up with an estimate of potential multifamily unit capacity. So in that northern Cohasset district, the model is giving us about 680 units. You'll notice that the district acreage, this is the total acreage that we've drawn, all of that orange area. The model modifies that and gives us a lower denominator. What it's doing is it's eliminating the undevelopable land, in this case, mostly the wetlands. And so the density then is calculated using this denominator instead of the total acreage. We're hitting 15 units per acre exactly. 3A South, we have a different set of setbacks, but we're also holding a unit, one parking space per unit, as well as 15 acres a unit. And this is giving us 112 units. The district acreage is 7.6. I don't know why this is a little bit lower, but maybe there's something in there. And it's coming out just slightly below 15, but the model is reporting us exactly at 15. We've talked subsequently or communicated that this is getting you more than you need in terms of the unit count, right? Our minimum is 638. We're about 790 here, but we are already at the minimum of the density. Is there any questions before I go on?
All right, so so you're telling me that the sub-district denominator, and that's because I had a question this morning that I don't know if Cassandra passed along about the accounting for the wetlands. So they recognize that some of this land is not going to get developed.
Correct.
But you're still saying that with the 45.4 acres around the station, we could still develop 40-something, 43 more units than we need.
Correct.
And then, all right, well, I guess, well, then there's other models, I guess, is if we want to pursue a split between the two districts, you know, then I guess, can we shrink the Cohasset Station district somewhat?
Yes.
We
So
could.
I thought, given the desire to get this a little bit tighter with respect to the requirements, we have a few possibilities of options that alternative scenarios that we can explore, and we can talk about them. One is you keep it as it is. Option two is you keep the Cohasset Station as it is and simply remove the 3A South, right? Because you're already complying here, both on capacity and density.
Yeah.
And then the third option that you just mentioned, Tom, is to keep the 3A South District as it is, but to reduce the size of the Cohasset Station area to meet the minimum requirements.
Yeah, and a large part of that Cohasset Station area, though, is a chunk of wetlands that you need for contiguity or whatever you call it.
Yes.
All right, and so on the other side, where the chunk of the district is, we have already developed commercial buildings. That area you pointed out that's been subdivided with a cul-de-sac, that has a permit for a commercial development.
Okay.
It's had two permits in the last 3 or 4 years. One didn't pan out, but so they're all developed, I guess, at this point. And then the other side, the only thing about the South District is that we had to consider the fact that along Gannett Pasture Road in North Situate, that's where they're going to be doing their development. And I understand there's already proposals for that road. And, you know, what would be the traffic impact of, you know, of us adding an apartment development and them having apartment developments just on the other side of the line. You know, that's a consideration about whether we go forward with a split district like that. Is there any ability here to go further afield than the 5.5 mile? And I ask that because, for example, in the southern portion here, you know, up ahead, you see a big building. That's the Shaw's Supermarket Plaza. No, the one further up. And, you know, there has been a developer who's made an inquiry about land to the south of that, about developing that. Couldn't do it under the current zoning, but, you know, I guess I'm asking how this 20% of it has to be within the 0.5 mile, correct?
Yeah, so if we zoom out generally, you're more than meeting that requirement up here.
Yeah. So
So,
we
I
might have
mean,
some, yeah, we might have some flexibility if we, in a south district, in other words.
yes.
Okay.
So again, it's only 20% of the capacity. We don't have the exact calc. We haven't cut this off, but you can, we're clearly above it right now. So if there were interest in expanding the purple area to the south, I believe that we could shrink the northern area and still meet the 20%.
Yeah, the problem with shrinking, and what I anticipate with the state is, again, the one big chunk on the, I guess we call it the north side of 3A, is wetlands, and it's not going to be built. And if we shrink it too much, they're going to say, oh, what all you have left here next to the Cohasset station is undevelopable land, and you're not
Well,
really giving them anything. It's going to require
Yeah.
the redevelopment of sites that are already developed.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, which is to make this area contiguous with this, we need to have some overlap. So the way they count contiguity is as long as you are directly across the street for some
Yeah.
distance, you'll meet that contiguity. But you make a good point. This is, if we eliminate this parcel, this gets a little funny. But again, this parcel isn't hurting you.
Right, okay.
And the state's already factored in the wetlands discount. The denominator is adjusted accordingly. And we're doing this work in Lincoln, lots and lots of wetlands, lots of excluded land, and we're using it in all kinds of places just for this purpose. And that use of wetlands was anticipated in the law.
All right. If you want to take another question, I'll first see if anybody on the bylaw committee has a question at this point. Amy, I'll get to you in a minute.
Yeah, Clark Brewer here. We have an area called West Corner, and it's not actually west in Cohasset, it's north. It's north between the Nantasket Junction and the Cohasset Station. Right
It's
at the
right
line,
by the S in sub-districts and that
yeah,
word.
just below your
sub-district.
ICT, right
Yeah,
below
right
there.
up there.
And West Corner is where Hall, Cohasset, and Hingham meet, and I believe there's bus service that goes through it. Is it possible that West Corner could be another sub-district? I mean, if we wanted to kind of look on a parcel by parcel basis and then and right size everything, would that be eligible if it has a bus? Amy Glassmeyer might know if the bus still runs through there.
Even if the bus doesn't run, the 20% needs to be within either one of these two circles.
20%, so 80% could be outside.
80% can be outside.
Oh, okay. Then because if it has access to public transportation, that's sort of a part of the symbiotic goal, seems like, for the program.
Yeah, and that's a valid planning reason to have your districts scattered, is to, if there is bus service or other things. So,
well, I mean, if these housing choice sub-districts could be anywhere in Cohasset, maybe it might take a live meeting with a map and parcels to kind of see what non-residential districts might make sense to include. Because the West Corner right now is zoned downtown business. We have another downtown business district out in Beechwood, which is near the southern tip of Cohasset. It's a small sub-district, but still, there was a recent development proposal there for a general store or ice cream with apartments, and I don't necessarily think that would make a bad sub-district. So I guess a part of my other question was, fine tuning the exact parcels, either the inside 20%, or the potential for outside ones. I mean, from a program perspective, I think it probably makes sense to have 50% right up there by the Cohasset train station, and maybe 2 other sub-districts, or 3 with 15, 15, and 15%. That might make sense, but it on a parcel by parcel basis, we kind of have a sense for whether the buildings on there are new, or whether there is potential access to septic systems. Sewer is spotty in a lot of these areas, although there is a regional sewer system that's being worked on. I just what do the other members think of maybe
Yeah, Clark,
down
I
the
actually was
paper?
gonna say something or ask something just similar, which is more on the feasibility of when we're looking at the specific locations of where we can do this between the 80 and 20. Is it worth looking at where we have
Yeah.
sidewalks, where there's water and
Right.
sewer, how close it is to the schools, proximity to other retail and shopping, just walkability factor,
Yeah,
as
grocery
we're kind of
store,
going
that
through
kind of
this. Yeah, right. Similar
Well,
question.
I would, the west corner and Beechwood business districts are very small. They're just a handful in both
They
places.
are.
They're just a handful of parcels. I don't think more than 4, 5, 6 parcels in each place.
Yeah, but this South District on 3A, that's near the North Situate station. That's small. I mean, it's
No, I know that. But I'm thinking
they're
if we were
similar
to,
in a way.
I
But I still
think,
think a public forum where we could sit down and kind of
I agree.
analyze each parcel and maybe rate them.
Yeah,
Um,
we're gonna bring this out to another forum other than this meeting, because obviously
like a public forum.
yeah, we don't have any public participation once again for our meeting. But I'm just, the objectives thus far has been to keep this kind of development away from the residential districts. And if we were to, minimize having 20% within the circle of the Cohasset station, I still would want to see the district concentrated on 3A. Because I think 3A provides the best infrastructure for the residents to either get to one of the 2 stations, or if they're commuting into the city, that would be 3A is the best infrastructure. It's where the stores and the supermarkets are. It's not terribly far from schools. I just think 3A provides really the best location for this.
Right. Well, I mean, even in the village where we have special permit, it's possible there could be a parcel or 2 that we would say it could be site plan review only, and have a denser where there's access to sewer, have a denser parcel use.
Yeah, I know the state's objective here is to make this accessible to transportation centers. So, I think we should kind
No,
of.
I get it. And that's why I was saying, 50% near the Cohasset train station, for sure.
All
As
right,
opposed to 80% or
Could we
whatever.
finish the presentation?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did go off. Matthew, do you want to carry on, or do you mind
Well,
taking
there's
questions?
there's one, well, when we get to it, let's talk more generally about areas, but I want to talk about some of the things that we'll need to clarify. And maybe I'll just bring this up. One quick point is that small sub-districts are okay as long as they're 5 acres. And as long as they're not completely arbitrarily located. But given the town's desire to keep this fairly tight to the minimum requirements, if I'm assuming that's correct, we will need to further. We've given you some sort of first calcs, but we need to refine what those calcs are. There's we need some clarity a little bit about how the state is wants us to calculate the area of roadways, which are included, but it's not clear how. And then I just wanted to put out there that the second piece is particularly in that that southern district, what I call the purple one. There are very few parcels, and some of them are quite narrow, so we might need to do some additional drilling down to make sure that the setbacks that we're indicating are feasible. The model is actually pretty good at making estimations, but its major flaw is that it cannot compute setbacks and the impacts of setbacks. So what we've done in other communities is to just double check on our own so we don't get caught later with some funny math.
Yeah, like you said, when I kind of drafted through the bylaw that would accompany this and the changes that would need to be made in different parts of our bylaw, I have calculated bigger setbacks than you had, more consistent with what we have in other parts of town. And maybe they're too great, but then I'm not wedded to 3 stories. I would be prepared to go to 4 or 5. Now, 4 or 5, then I was thinking, well, then, our fire department infrastructure, we have 1 ladder truck, but, is it sufficient? Do we set the town on a price tag of, expensive fire equipment if we start going to 5 stories? Because we don't have that anywhere right now. But anyway, I mean, I guess if we still have you on board, we can play with different scenarios. Because I assume if we had bigger setbacks, that's somewhat compensated by going up higher.
Yeah, and I think that my hunch is, particularly in the northern area where those parcels are big, that the setbacks will not have a huge impact on the capacity.
Yeah.
I think the primary limiting thing is the 15 units per acre. I can put bigger setbacks in the model and it won't show any difference at all, because it just what it does is you put in any setbacks and it calculates that you've got 20% open space, and it doesn't make much sense. But I just wanted to point that out, that we can understand that in more detail. You don't have a ton of parcels, but I can tell pretty much now that on those bigger parcels, the setbacks won't make that much difference.
Yeah.
But you can see on these very skinny ones that you start to subtract 10 or 15 feet from the side yards, and they get a little bit, undevelopable.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, like, for that district, that sub-district right there, as a practical matter, somebody's going to have to come along and buy multiple lots and string them together. And I guess the question is, has the state taken any position on that? Like, if they show you creating a district with unbuildable lots on an individual basis, but you tell them, well, somebody will buy them all and string them together. Are they thinking you're trying to get around it, or are they rejecting that use of these really small individual lots? Like,
the state doesn't worry about it.
Okay.
The model, if a parcel is tiny, it might come up as having 0 capacity once it's subtracted the parking areas and the setbacks and that sort of thing. But it might spit out, on a small parcel, it might spit out a couple of units, maybe 3. And I should just say also, the state isn't worried about septic capacity. That is something that's dealt with on a project by project basis. They've it doesn't hinder your compliance at all, whether you're on sewer or not.
Can you just speak to me? Excuse me, Tom, can I ask?
Yeah, I was going to go Jack and Mike and David on the committee. If you guys have anything, now would be the time.
Can you clarify when you say 15 units? Is that, how is that determined? Can that go up? Can that go down? If you had a higher density in one area, can that compensate? I just don't know where you get the 15.
Yes, you can set it at whatever you want, so long as the average density of all your districts is 15 units an acre or more.
Okay.
So we've got, in Lincoln, for instance, we've got one district that's 8 units per acre, and then we've, another one that's 25 units per acre, but they balance each other out.
Sure.
And again, as long as you're meeting those criteria about the units close to the T, the minimum area, and the overall average density, you have some flexibility.
Right.
David,
David, or, no, I'm sorry.
We have, in other towns where we're flirting with the minimum, sometimes we just nudge this number, the units per acre, up or down by 1 or 2, just to see what we get, but we can fine tune that.
All right, David or Mike, any questions you have at this point? Otherwise, I'll open it up to other people who have their hand up.
I'm good, Tom.
All right. Amy, I see your hand up. Amy Glassmeyer is another member of our planning board.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone that's on this call. It is so fascinating. It really is a situation that has great potential, but also is very constrained. So my comments are the following. I don't understand, because I got on, because I didn't, the tea didn't get me home for soon. I don't understand what our objective is. For me personally, as a person that has to think about water supply, schools, teachers, traffic signals, sidewalks, and all of that as a planner, what I want to think about is, what is the maximum amount of potential do we have as a community to expand our collective community, given what we have? And so I don't know if the philosophy of this conversation is about how we're trying to minimize the impact of what will happen to us, instead of thinking that, in my past experience, when you grow, the money arrives and you can expand. So I'd really like to have somebody set the philosophical intent as a starting point, so that I can understand whether I have to pick the smallest or the largest set of conditions.
All right, well, let me take a swing at that. I mean, first and foremost, this is the state mandate that's coming down on us that, the seminar I went to out in Worcester last year, and the common sentiment seemed to be, it's, at the beginning, it was one size fits all, and didn't take into account, each individual community's needs or challenges. I know there's been some towns out in Central Mass that don't even have a station, I think, but they're within the mandate of this, and they're like, it's crazy that you're telling me we have to develop, zone for hundreds of units, in our small town. And, so they've set this number in Cohasset of 43 acres and 638 units. And 638 it's supposed to be around 15, I guess that's the original limit, was it shouldn't be more than 15% of your total housing stock, but in our case, it's closer to 19% or 20%. It's a substantial impact. And that's one of the problems with it. And from the first go around, I mean, we were originally in the very first go around, we were slated for 750 units. Now it's down to 638. Maybe there'll be more refinements as towns bitch about this, but our first and foremost, we have to comply with it because of the various tools that the state could use.
Tom, I don't think you're answering Amy's question. She kind of
Well,
wanted
no,
the
all
big
right, so
picture
that-
philosophy, not like, not the details.
Concur
And
with
maybe
that.
No, I know, all right, no,
maybe
but
the
that's-
consultant could take
Well,
a stab at
no,
answering it.
First and foremost is the compliance factor. Now, in the discussions that I've had with the select board, didn't get any clear direction. I got 2 of them to say minimal compliance. The others didn't really take a position strongly one way or the other. And this committee has taken the position that, okay, but wherever we develop it, let's keep it out of the residential districts and not all of a sudden have apartment complexes springing up in the residential districts, and let's develop. The stations are on 3A, let's develop the district on 3A. So, you know, there is a strong sentiment, I think, of minimalist, but again, we haven't fleshed that all out with all the town leaders to get a definitive position, and we're presented here tonight with a proposal that, given the marching orders of we said what to look at, we have 700 and something units when we only need 638. Now, I'm sure there's some town fathers who are going to object to that strongly and urge the minimalist approach. And then there's others who think, well, you know, we do need to develop this housing. But the legislation, as I understand it, has not done anything to help the communities deal with the impact of this. And that's something that I think at the moment we're all being left to fend for on our own. And Matt, if you want to add anything, please do.
I think, you know, communities have taken different approaches. Some are just hold their nose, you know, this is what we got to do. It's the law, and let's try to make it as little impactful as we can. Other communities say, you know, this is probably not on our ideal timeline, but this is an opportunity to think about, you know, certain kinds of growth, diversifying our housing stock, you know, for people who may want to downsize or age in place or whatever the case may be. It's really what the town wants and what you think is, you know, we'll get by at town meeting, and how those things are communicated to the general public, and all of these factors come into play. So you know, again, the law was handed down. It's got rules. We enter numbers into spreadsheets, but at the end of the day, in terms of the longer term sort of planning, that's really for the town to decide if they want to embrace it or just sort of get by. And both, you know, both are real choices. I will also add that, and people keep forgetting, but this is a zoning capacity. The likelihood that every single parcel identified would be built to the amount of capacity that, you know, the model is telling us. I'm imagining that if that were even possible, it would occur over a very long period of time. So my general sense is that the impacts would not be immediate. And, you know, some communities have chosen deliberately, they've chosen areas where there is already multifamily development, to minimize that impact. And that's a choice that can be made as well.
Well, following,
All right, well, I'll let you follow up, but I see Kevin has his hand up too, so.
okay, so
Clark?
following on what Clark was suggesting, let's think about the following set of financial imperatives. We have a 1980 to 1990 high school and middle school that needs to be renovated. We have virtually no sidewalks, and yet that's something that the public wants. There's no way that the things that we all desire collectively can be achieved if we don't find a way by which we also incorporate diversity of physical units, but also diversity of how the economy of the locality works. So this is an opportunity if we think about it that way. And I just would like to ask that we have a calculus that includes how can we have what we need in light of what we know we have to do in the next 10 years that achieves a vibrant community. And I just want us to return to our master plan. We have a lot of really good data that tells us how many people are going to be, you know, 90 years old in what time, and how long is our water infrastructure going to last? What are we going to do about climate change? So honestly, I think building to a level of capacity that is both diverse, but also enriching the community is the way that we generate revenue. It's a mechanism that we have to take advantage of. It's not
Well,
trying to steal anything from anybody. It's really about how do we become a community that we are now undersized in terms of infrastructure. We are oversized in terms of lot size. So at some point we have to make a decision of how we accommodate the things we want to remain the town of Cohasset.
well, again, the state at the moment hasn't accounted for any of that and is leaving us to fend for ourselves. They have a hammer over all of our heads. They have lowered that hammer on some of the towns who are resisting this already. That's their policy at the moment. That may, of course, could change with somebody different in different offices, but you know, the fact is we have to do this, and then with the things like the initiatives the selectmen are taking, the select board is taking for this town meeting, hopefully we get other mechanisms in place to then deal with the fallout from this. Again, I don't think we're going to ever see 638 units developed in anything like a short term, if at all, given the sites that we're looking at. But, you know, the problem is we have no choice about this, and that, you know, the state's philosophy is, you know, we have a housing crisis in this Commonwealth, and putting housing next to transportation centers is the way to deal with that. One way to deal with that. But they have left us to fend for ourselves on the rest of it and the impact of it. And it's not fair, but, you know, people said the same thing when 40B first came down. It wasn't fair. It was a mandate without thinking about the consequences of that to the communities that were affected. I don't disagree that we need to start thinking about these things, you know, in conjunction with all of this. And I think it ties into what some of the things the select board is trying to set up at this town meeting. Kevin, you were next, and then I'll go to Jack.
Yeah, I'd like to just ask the consultant, and this is in regard to the Cohasset, the north location, how Hingham abuts that, and you can see there's a sliver that is well within the radius of the circle that's drawn there, whether the actions or inactions of one town within a radius of that circle have any effect on the other town. For instance, if Hingham decided to develop within that part of that wedge, as it's shown there, over the town line adjacent to the Cohasset station, could that have any effect on the numbers required of Cohasset? Or is one town on one side of the border their numbers, and on the other town on their side of the border their numbers, and there's no effect from one or the other, even though they may be sharing the station?
I'm pretty sure you're just on your own, that what Hingham does will not affect what you are allowed to do to comply with the requirements.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm happy to look into it, but we haven't come across anything like that. I think it would be probably too difficult to
It's the same
administer.
issue. It's the same issue as we're developing. If we choose to develop near North Situate Station, you know, what we're doing on our side of the town line has got zero impact.
It's an interesting concept of towns potentially working together. I was on the MAPC South Shore Coalition, where all the towns in the area met and were solving the same problems individually most of the time. The state actually, from a grant perspective, really like it when towns work together. So I think Kevin's question is definitely relevant and something we could follow up on over the winter.
Yeah, and I think especially with North Situate, because I've heard that development along Gannett Road is on the horizon.
That's Henry
And
Beetle
that'll be
Bailey.
Yeah, or Henry Turner Bailey, I'm sorry. It is, and there's a huge traffic impact if we're both developing willy-nilly on either side of that town line. That
As
little-
well, an issue that's related is the 3A corridor improvements from Beechwood to Henry Beetle Bailey.
Yeah, yeah, which are almost.
Which are
finished.
coming in a year or so, and it's gonna
Yep.
transform that whole district in a way that I think, we could dovetail the planning thoughts on the sub-district on what's coming from the state.
Yep.
Consolidating curb
I-
cuts and things too.
Yeah, I have no problem with opening up a dialogue with Situate, although Cohasset opening up a dialogue with Situate because of other things going on isn't something that's easy to do this year. As far as that.
Well, you
Hingham-
can't be
I
afraid
know that.
to
No,
talk to your neighbor just because they
No, I
blew
know
all their
that.
leaves in your yard.
No, I know that, and then I think that's a good idea that we should reach out to them. The Hingham one is a little less likely, given what's on the Hingham side of that little jog of Hingham in there is along North Main Street, and there's.
And the
always-
South Shore Coalition of MAPC is a great
Clark,
venue for doing that.
Clark, I've had my hand up for quite a while.
Yeah, all right, so go ahead, Jack, go
I'm
ahead.
just having a dialogue, that's all, but yeah, go ahead,
Clark,
Jack.
you're
No, I'm
Jack,
not. Go ahead, Jack.
somebody else.
Jack,
Go ahead, Jack.
All
Jack,
right.
I engaged him, no problem, no
No,
harm,
he
no foul.
stepped on
Let's
it
just go,
repeatedly.
let's
He
just
stepped
go.
on,
Go
and I
ahead,
think
Jack.
in
Go
order
with-
for the meeting to be fair,
Jack,
when
just
people-
say
Go
your
ahead,
piece.
Jack.
I speak, never mind. I have nothing
Just-
more to say.
Just say your piece if you got, forget about arguing with Clark or with me.
I'm not
Just
arguing. I'm trying to say my piece. I haven't been able to.
Go ahead, I was recognizing you next. We were following up
thank
on Kevin's comment, all right? Go ahead, Jack, please.
Okay. I think the sense around town is that this is an imposition, and well, we realize that we have to deal with this, and we will successfully. The idea of self-government and determining the best way to do that is best, handled on the local level. And people do want to conserve the type of town that Cohasset is. So our mandate really should be to understand what our citizens want and deal with this in a way that's consistent with keeping Cohasset the way it is. As far as Amy's points about infrastructure, one of the things in all the initiatives is that, in fact, we are addressing that. And we're addressing that on a local level with local solutions, which I think are actually making some very meaningful, progress. But we do want to keep in mind that, number one, we are going to comply. And number two, part of the compliance will be creating a different type of housing, which I think in some parts of the town will be appreciated. But we want to keep it where parts of town that it's appropriate. And I suspect that the select board and more importantly, the majority of the population in Cohasset which feel strongly about that.
What else am I next? Kevin, is your hand still up? You have another comment? Let me go to David. We haven't heard from David.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I'd like to thank the consultants for taking the first crack at this. I know it's going to be a process with not only this committee, but with all the other town boards as we go through it, going in through the spring and maybe past that. But I would say that, that the legislation, it is an unfunded mandate that is put upon towns. If we do go to open things up to really get multifamilies in different areas, the financial impacts there will be on the town because of the size of the growth. You might need more police patrols, you might need more fire you might need, and then of course the schools and otherwise. And because of the little caveat in the legislation that you can't restrict, you can't do age restrictions, you can't restrict the number of bedrooms and so forth. When we make whatever bylaw that's going to fit this legislation, you're really on a roulette wheel because you don't know what you're going to get once the developer comes. The developer could come with saying, geez, we want to put something that's 55 plus. The developer could come and say, we want 3-bedroom apartments, which would add a lot more school children. So I think what we have to strike here is a balance to try and think and know that we could be getting either side of that that scale when we do create the bylaw for where things should go. But I think it'll be a process. It's going to take some time, and I think we need to have a balance in what we're looking at in order to keep the town's character. One thing I would say is, though, is because it goes to just a general site plan review, as we're going forward with our bylaws for zoning, I think we are looking at, but I think we're going to have to hone in on that, is what type of mitigation and or mitigation fees and or whatever can be done with site plan review and or any other developments. So when we create that part of the bylaw that everyone wanted, that the selectmen had asked us for as well, I think that would be important. But we're going to have to look at site plan review to add some belt and suspenders on what's going to happen, because that's going to be the process that this is going to go through. Now, I'm sure the state is not going to allow people to, weigh it down too much, but nevertheless, I think we're going to have to look at that even more closely when we come up with some of the different bylaws that we do coming up in the spring and or next fall town meeting. So thank you.
Along those lines, like I said, I've been working on a draft bylaw to implement this. We couldn't do age restriction, and the developer couldn't do an age restriction, the 55 and over. And by the way, the market for those things have collapsed. Nobody's developing those anymore. I'm hoping we can get away in the bylaw with saying, there would have to be an equal number of 1, 2s, and 3s, bedrooms. We can't restrict it to one of those, but we hopefully can mandate at least a mix so that we're not overwhelmed with a development that is going to be, all 3s and generating a lot of pressure on the school system. But, we're going to have to see. We have to get into the drafts and see what we can do. I think Matthew would back this up, that there's still, this is still a work in progress at the state level too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I'm not sure they're fully knowing what they're going to approve and not approve yet, as different communities start rolling this out. But, next year is going to be telling, because the deadline is December next year. So, the towns are going to start rolling these out in the spring, and we'll see where they're going to go.
Well, for sure, I think we definitely want to be in the compliance bucket. That's for sure, because the towns that don't, I think you don't need to have a crystal ball to see what's going to happen to them if they don't.
No, that's already happening. I think.
Yeah.
Middleborough, I think, is fighting this, and Middleborough is going to get hammered. I think there's another town that's fighting it too, that's getting hammered. But the AG's office is coming down hard on them, because the current AG is a big believer in this legislation.
Yeah, I don't think you can get too cute where you're making somebody dance in the head of a pin to get a project through. That's not going to happen, as you're saying. But I think we're going to have to look at different things that could be put into it. That will pass legal muster. That'll make it fit for Cohasset. That's all. Because they gave just a wide brushstroke to every town, every city, with general legislation, and again, it was a one size fits all. So we have to make it fit.
And David's point about mitigation is very, very important, and it's an opportunity to get some money for the infrastructure needs that Amy points out. And very importantly, what mitigation does is it does not allow a developer to come in and get a free ride on the taxpayer of the public infrastructure that's required for their project. So that's important. Good point, David.
Yeah, and the members of this committee will know that we've talked about a development impact bylaw. David and I have looked into it. Hanover has one. It has been brought to our attention in a project that the planning board is dealing with. And I've taken a stab at trying to Cohassetize it. But I think it's imperative that we bring in that kind of bylaw at the same time we bring this in. But then the question will be, is if a town like Cohasset or Hanover and has an impact development impact bylaw, is the state going to allow that apply to this housing choice district? Are they going to say, well, that's too restrictive, you're putting too many financial burdens on the project? So that remains to be seen, but I think we should still work towards putting in a development impact bylaw at the same time we do this.
But we don't know the answer to that, and we'll have to go through it. But
Yeah.
I think if you lean on the side of having a sensible nexus to the project, and I know you would say, well, what does that mean? You have to define it. But I think that's where you would want to stay, is that if it's sensible requirements for the project, then yes. If it's going to be a Christmas tree, then no. And so we'll have to figure out what that is.
Yeah, generally those types of bylaws are enforceable if they deal with infrastructure, things like sidewalks and roads and maybe sewer and water infrastructure. You're not going to be able to, I don't think you're going to be able to extract, X thousands of dollars per resident, in a particular development to put towards schools. I don't think the current state of Massachusetts law allows that type of linkage. There's very limited, and I think Judge Cutler has pointed this out to us, there's very limited areas where we can set up legitimate linkage and require it in a bylaw. So go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to this a couple of points. One is the law allows a municipality to require up to 10% affordable units.
Which we would do.
Yeah, and but not more, for the reasons that you cite. It's seen as an impediment unless you do a study. And to this question of ones or twos or three bedrooms, I don't know if requiring a certain mix would be allowable. I'm guessing not, but we can confirm. One approach that's being taken in other communities is adding floor area ratio to the other dimensional requirements. The model, just so all of you know, the model assumes that a unit is 1,000 square feet, and that's gross. So averaging 1,000 square feet per unit, it is possible to calibrate the FAR so that you get closer to that. There's been some noise in Lincoln just today. Well, you're allowing 15 units per acre, but what if they're 15 McMansions, right? So there are ways to do that, and there's also some good reasons. I mean, not just school impacts, but it's diversifying the types of housing that you have in your community, wanting to see more ones and twos, which quite honestly have very little school enrollment impact typically.
Yeah, I mean that the school enrollment has always been a concern. Particularly, we did rebuild our schools 20 years ago. We're at the point where there's a lot of talk about redoing them again. When Avalon was built with 200 units, I think they're all 2 bedrooms. And yeah, they were limited to all 2 bedrooms by negotiation with the town, but there was a projection that 76 kids would be generated. And the former chair of this committee, who used to be on the school committee, said at the peak, Avalon has never generated more than like 19 kids in those 200 units. It's ended up in a lot of ways being a downsizing or split up divorced couple kind of development more than a family development. But so
Excuse me, Tom, I just have a quick question for Matthew.
Yeah, go ahead.
Matthew, obviously the towns in the housing choice program are going to be developing their own overlay district zoning bylaws. With that said, I don't think we want to start from scratch necessarily. If we're sitting down as a committee, writing an overlay district bylaw on our own, or with your help, wouldn't we want to see what other towns are doing first? Like has does anyone have a draft yet, or
Yes.
Okay.
Like
is there a
Lexington came
model
early.
bylaw that's been drafted that
is.
could be applied, not universally, but modified?
Yes, the state has
Yeah,
supplied a sample
Oh, good.
bylaw that can be modified.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
which isn't very extensive. The
Right.
text, the bylaw itself does not have a lot of requirements in it. It's relatively simple. The key things are I think the dimensions that we'll put in that go in Article 5, and the uses really, I think we should try to encourage mixed use, but the uses won't be intensive. It's the things like the dimensions that we apply to them, and what other things can we kind of get away with, like dictating a bedroom mix, or do we allow density bonuses in certain cases if we, to incentivize something in a direction we want to
But
go.
I'm sorry, Tom, but my point was we don't want to start from scratch, and
No, I didn't.
it would be great to have other communities sort of thinking about that before we start writing one, like before you sit down this weekend, Tom, and start writing the
No, I've already done it
district
and
bylaw.
I've already done it and worked off the state model.
Right, exactly.
So I'd like
But
to,
I mean, and just in terms of your contract going forward, Matthew, we do have Judge Cutler working with us as the former chief judge of the land court and has been writing all of our bylaw updates. So, it'll be a collaborative effort here. Anyway, Amy, you had your hand up again.
yeah, I just want to understand how we're understanding this challenge. We are a community of families, and we're a community of elderly people past retirement, and we are also a community of families that are graduating kids and they are going on to college. Right now, we are bereft of information about our demographic frontier. What do we expect? What do we want? What kind of place do we want to be? Quite frankly, where I live, am faced with people going up and down the hill with wheelchairs and other implements to get them to where they're going, that's not the world I want to live in. I want to live in a world that is diverse, and I want it to be a place that, in fact, we have reoccurring kids that graduate from our schools, and I want to have evolutionary infrastructure. And I'm struggling in this conversation with having anybody setting a set of milestones that make it possible for us to be something that is not exclusive. I don't want to be a place that is exclusive. I need that.
Well,
and I don't know if everybody else wants that either. I think what I'm just struggling over, we need a new school. We need this, we need this, we need this. That means that we have constraints that we have to address. And I feel like we are using this new desire on the part of the state to have better available volumes of different kinds of housing. And I think we're dismissing the fact that that's the purpose.
Yeah, it is the purpose. But the larger picture of the town, all points well taken, is beyond this legislation. They being the state, have not thought all of that through, and they just say diversity of housing is a good idea for every community in this Commonwealth, and we have the ability to impose it on at least those communities who have T stations, and we're going to do it. But beyond that, they're not concerned with how we then deal with it, and that's for us. That's a bigger picture.
I literally cannot accept that comment.
I don't care if you can't accept it. That's the reality. This legislation is not dealing with the bigger picture.
It is mechanistically, but we have the choice of how we want to be a participant in this process with all of its constraints. And I just, I all of a sudden have a neighborhood that previously had no children on the street. Now the street is full of children. What am I supposed to do as a public official and say, well, we're going to let the high school degrade, we're going to this or that? I think we have to separate our own concerns about the cost liabilities of what's being proposed and be inventive and come up with ideas that actually add to what we have and mitigate things which we know fundamentally are 25 years into the future.
I don't disagree, but that's beyond the scope of what this committee is doing, and it's much bigger picture stuff that, yes, and I you know, as far as this town becoming like an elite enclave, I
We
personally have
already
some.
are that.
Well, I know that, and I have a proposal for the spring that I've hinted about to lots of people to possibly deal with that, but it may not fly. But these are bigger picture things that beyond the scope of the zoning bylaw committee and the scope of what this legislation is requiring us to do. I don't disagree with a word you've said, but we're not going to solve that on this committee in drafting the appropriate bylaw to comply with this legislation, unfortunately. I think it's great that the state, if this mandate, you know, if the development that this is going to require, you know, possibly allow to happen happens, yeah, it'll diversify this town quite a bit. It'd probably be a good thing for this town. But at the cost of, you know, if it's fully developed, 20% of our housing stock, we grow by 20% in a relatively short period of time. That's got other impacts, and I agree, and we need to be able to be
Tom,
prepared for them.
Realistically, when we started the master plan, we noticed what was happening in terms of growth. So when you say 20%, ...
Mhm.
I think it's important for us to recognize what's happened without anybody telling us what to do.
Yes, it went up
Yeah.
16% since 2000. Our
Well-
population has increased by 16% since the year
Yes, so
2000.
that's pretty close to 20. And
Yep.
so doesn't that give us the right to try to decide what we think is right, what we want, but also recognizing that maybe this is what growth is going to be like in a town like Cohasset that's 18 miles away from Boston.
Can we
This
get back to the
legislation, this
matter?
legislation doesn't give us the right to question that, but we on our own do. Yeah, we still, the reality is we have to work within the confines of what we're being presented by the state here. Jack, go ahead.
Can we please get back to what this meeting is about? All these other things are philosophical debates, but
Yep.
we are here, and let us do what our mandate or what we're supposed to do.
All right.
So,
All right, so here's what I'm going to suggest for the next time. Our next meeting of this committee, I don't know if Cassandra's out there. I don't know when we have
I'm
that
here.
scheduled. Okay, yeah, I don't know what we have scheduled, but we at the same time, not only dealing with this, we have to deal with other things to get ready for next spring. I think that we need to publicize this presentation so that people will look at the tape, number one. Number two, if we still have UTIL with us, which is a good thing, I think we should schedule a presentation to the select board because they are the chief executive. And as I said, I had a discussion and I got a sense from two people that this should be a minimalist approach. I didn't really get a sense from the other three. We need to have that kind of policy direction. And then I think, we're coming into the holidays, which is a bad time. And then, then we get into time constraints of getting this ready for the spring. But we do need to do some kind of public forum or other types of outreach to get the sense of the community on this.
So I recommend a workshop on this.
Okay.
Not just outreach, hey, this is what's gonna happen, and
No, I get it. Yeah.
a real workshop where stakeholders can state clearly how they think this as an opportunity might affect them, and how we can best as a community take advantage of what's being thrust upon us.
Okay, we just, right now, again, with the holidays, it's just a scheduling matter, right?
Yeah, probably not before Christmas, right?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, Cassandra, do ask Tracy to see if we can get on a select board agenda fairly soon. And when we go to the select board, Matt, I would like to have you and your team with us at that time for you to make this similar presentation to them.
Yep.
as far as the bylaw text itself, I'll circulate what I have. We can look at the model. We can look if any other community, Matt, that you're aware of has gotten to the point of drafting.
Great.
Again, I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel, but in this case, we might be the wheel because somebody's got to go first with this. And but I think we should get moving on this because I really think we should be prepared to bring it forward as soon as we can. You know, we could wait to the fall town meeting, but I don't want to. I wouldn't want to risk a defeat and then not be able to bring something back quickly in time to meet the state's deadline.
Well, Tom, philosophically, it doesn't hurt to shoot for a spring town meeting, knowing that we have fall town meeting as a backup.
Correct, absolutely. So
Oh, Matt, could you just shoot me your email after this is over?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
yeah, Jack,
I don't know
Matt.
that there is a chat on here, but
Yeah.
Okay.
Jack, I can share contact information with you.
Oh, thank you.
Jack's a member of our select board.
Okay, great. And
Member.
if you
of-
could
that's
copy
on-
Taskina, that would be great too.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
he's
I'd
on the
like that.
bylaw committee and he's also a member of the select board. So, all right. So I think unless anybody else has any other questions of Matt or discussion.
Yeah, I just want to point out to Matt, to the extent that any of these variables that can go into this model can have costs associated with them, even if they're ballpark costs or costs based on a known or assumed value. Say if one of the variables is 3 stories versus 4 stories. Well, there's a known cost for going from 3 stories to 4 stories because of the ladder truck issue. And ladder trucks that can access 4 stories in their roofs cost X amount. If in the location of some of these parcels, they're on the south side of Route 3A and versus on the north side of Route 3A, and there's no sidewalk infrastructure to get from the south side of Route 3A to the north side where the schools are, what does that mean? There's got to be some costs associated with that. Putting in sidewalks, signals, traffic mitigation, and or perhaps shuttles to significant developments on the south side of 3A so that there's safe passage of people that reside there to infrastructure on the north side of 3A, like schools. To the extent that any of these variables you have in your model can have associated costs with them, I think that's important to the conversation within the boards of this town and to the public going forward.
Yeah, it's hard for us to ballpark those things from where we sit. Other communities like Milton have hired economic consultants who analyze just this thing to figure out what the net impact is. Obviously, there are costs associated with municipal services, fire, police. There's school enrollments, and then there's positive revenue in the form of tax revenue. And these experts try to do that math for various municipalities. I mean, before you go there, I guess I would ask that for the town to be clear with what they would do with that information relative to the approach here.
That's an excellent question, and I'm glad you asked it. In the absence of that information and the vacuum that there will be without that information, people will stand up and say that they're the experts on that, and here are their numbers, and here's their opinion on that. This
Right.
needs to be brought to the fore right at the beginning and now, and I think this town needs to, if that's outside of your expertise, we need to bring that in very soon.
Oh, let me just add something that as we've dealt with, the planning board has dealt with the project on Black Horse Lane, our DPW can tell us what the cost of a sidewalk is per linear foot. They can tell us what repaving the road is per linear foot. 3A will never get into repaving because it's a state road, but we could calculate. Well, we could determine where we would want to see sidewalks go to, or from any of these districts we create, and we could calculate a cost. It's not going to affect this bylaw, but it will affect if we do a development impact bylaw. mean, one of the things that was thrown in our face about the Hanover one is that its dollar figures are incredibly small and cheap, not based on current costs of sidewalks and roadways. So, I think we can develop that, and it's going to come in the form of another bylaw that'll give the planning board, power through the site plan review process for these projects to ask for mitigation money. I think we can do a lot of that on our own. But let me tell you another thing is that 20-something years ago, at a Mass Municipal Association meeting, the select board members would go to, I remember distinctly there was a presentation, and this was circa 2000, and of course it's probably out of date, but that for every $1.25 every dollar of residential tax revenue you raised from new development, it cost you $1.25 in services, and that included schools. So residential development was a losing proposition unless you had very expensive houses that covered the number of kids that lived in the house. I don't know if those numbers are still true, but
I hear what you're saying, Tom, but I would concur with Kevin is that maybe Matt could give us some of the names of economic experts, so we could talk with the town manager or even Cassandra, being there in the planning world, because when you have we don't have them here, but if you have a big project in a big town that has real highway going through it, sometimes the planning boards will hire their own economic consultant on their side to computate what the mitigation fee should be, so that if it ever gets appealed, it's going to stick. It's going to stick in court because they have a model and they've got it right there in black and white of what they were basing it off of. They weren't just pulling numbers out of the air. So I think that, we don't get those kind of developments here, but they certainly do in other big towns, and they use, economic or municipal economic people to come up with those facts, so that when they make their decisions, they're going to stick in court, knowing that they're going to get appealed if they ask for too much. So I think we could do the same, and then not only this, but even the mitigation bylaw, we could look at that. That might be interesting too, to see what the impacts would be. And yes, there would be some things we could draw off of. We know from the DPW, we know from Brian Joyce what sidewalks, what everything else costs, but that could be put into that computation that the economic person could do. So
I'm going to have to go to the select board hat in hand asking for some money. We do not have any money in the budget. And there's no, but there's, for example, this development impact bylaw, we need one in order to be able to impose these costs, to legally impose these costs. And we should have good numbers. And that's going to, as we're all discussing right now, that needs some outside expert to tell us what those good numbers should be. Likewise, if we're thinking about changes, originally thinking about changes to Article 5, that needs some consultants, and already reached out to MAPC, but we have no money in the budget to hire MAPC. So just to add this to the list of things we have to ask for money for.
Yeah, Tom, I think that's a good point. And as you know, I've been a big proponent of this whole idea of mitigation fees. If you're going to go down that route, to David's point, you have to be able to justify it. So when we end up with the town meeting and the subsequent election after that, why don't we sit down and talk? Because I think that's a reasonable expense, and I'm quite sure we'll allocate some funds.
All right.
Cassandra has her hand up.
Good to hear. Yeah, Cassandra, when is our next meeting?
I'll answer that in a second. But just to the point of kind of looking at the economic impact of potentially doing developments like this, Matthew or anybody else in the UTILE team, if you have a consultant that you've worked with in the past, feel free to send them our way. We do have some grant funding that we can use for that, specifically as it relates to this, not necessarily other bylaw changes, but we could go that route.
Okay, I will make a recommendation. Milton just did this, and I saw an excellent presentation. So
Perfect. Good. Send them my way. And then to answer your question, Tom, in regards to when your next meeting is, you have not set a date at this time.
All right. Well, why don't we we have to schedule around this planning board, so why don't we shoot for the first Monday in December? Give ourselves a little break. There'll be some materials I'll circulate to get us ready to jump in. And then I'll need to see the select board about funding for things, and then separately we'll set up a time with the select board where we can have UTO do this type of presentation to them as well. And the workshop, we can be working on how that would be, what day, week it would be, or a night, probably best on a weekend, but probably shoot for that for as early in January as we could possibly get. You know, and just for the committee, we're going to be working on multiple fronts. You know, there's a lot of work to do. I was speaking to the judge today. She's already started to dive into some of the other articles in the bylaw. So, you know, we're going to need all hands on deck. We're going to have multiple things going on as we head towards the Springtown meeting, which I hope stays in May, just so that we maximize our time to get things ready. All right, if there's nothing else, I will thank Matthew and his team for being here tonight and for doing this. I will shoot you my draft of a bylaw just because it had different dimensions. Again, I don't know if you said the setback models aren't gonna, it's not going to change anything. So everybody else, that's, you know, we'll do what we can to solicit more feedback from the community, but think about yourself, what you've seen tonight about 2 districts, maybe even more, shrinking one, making one bigger, however you want to do it, and think about that. We'll go forward from here. Just, you know, again, with Springtown meeting as our target. All right. That said, I'll ask someone for a motion to adjourn and to second that motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Okay, alphabetical roll call, all in favor?
aye,
Aye.
Aye.
On Callahan, aye.
Jack Craig.
Yes. Yeah, state your name and.
Vicky, aye. Did you get me, Tom?
Yeah. All right, everybody, and Cassie,
Yes.
I don't know if Cassie's still out
Good
there. All right, Kevin and Amy, I don't know if Amy's here, but Kevin, thank you for being at the meeting tonight and asking questions. I'm glad the members of the planning board all jumped in tonight. So, all right, thank you all, and we'll
Thank
see
you.
you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
All
Night.
right.